Great. So we need to move directly into the next panel, headed by Mr. Michael Ratner. We don't have a set break in the morning because we're so jammed up, which is a good problem to have. But we do have things outside, and we're about ready to have lunch. So try to hold it together as best you can. And I promise you, during lunchtime, we'll have some more time to relax. All right, is everybody logged on and so on? Okay, panel on viability of alternatives. I think this is quite appropriate. It's going to be an interesting shift here. So, Michael, over to you.
Hello. Thank you, Andrew. It's a little bit hard following Mr. Podesta, but I'll do my best. And also to get us on track for lunch.
We can run a little over.
I've always been told you never want to stand between people and food, so myself included. So with that, I think this panel is appropriately set after the conversations this morning, which seem to focus more on energy production, what's going to win out, what's going to not, and we're kind of looking at on this panel technologies that are out there that need, in my mind, need to come to market to make some certain of these things viable, and we're going to hear from people from different sectors. So on our panel, we have Justin Mackey, a grad student at the University of Pittsburgh, who's done some work on critical minerals, particularly lithium. And then we have two people on video. Excuse me, I'm having some allergies up here. Shawn Bennett, who's with Battelle, who had been Deputy Assistant Secretary at the Department of Energy for fossil fuels. And now he's focused on CCS and that technology, with Battelle being a leading research and development firm. And then finally, Sid Green, who I've known for a long time. Sid is participating. Unfortunately, he's been up here before, but couldn't make it up this time. He's been in the oil and gas sector for 50-odd years, fracking in the early 50s or mid to late 50s, and he's here to talk about nuclear power. So with that, I would also say one of the interesting aspects for me was recently I testified before the Senate Budget Committee, which is, you can look that up and stuff. But what was interesting was I got some criticism for some of the numbers I used, which were basic numbers that you've seen multiple speakers use. And one of the questions was, why are you using those numbers? And I said, because they're common numbers, everybody knows them. But the criticism came because the view was that if you look at the numbers, replacing fossil fuels with renewables is very hard, and it's going to take a lot of work and a lot of effort to do that. And so again, I think our panel is going to look at hopefully some of the positive things. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Justin to talk about his work as it relates to this panel.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Disclaimer, I am a scientist, not a policy analyst or a politician, so this is like a really interesting snapshot into the other side of things. A lot of the work as a researcher that I do is funded by higher level policy or some type of national strategic interest, and the money trickles down to us, so we do some work and fill in some of the numbers that Michael was talking about that Congress doesn't like. And so part of this talk, I don't have any slides, so feel free to just interrupt me if you have a question or something, but I'm going to talk about critical minerals. You all know about this topic. It's been broadcast over every news channel. It's matters of strategic and domestic and energy and defense interests. Broadly, it's just a group of minerals that we need for things like semiconductors, or batteries, or certain manufacturing initiatives that have sensitive supply chains. Either the minerals are processed in a country that has, sensitive industrial trade relations with the U.S., or we're just not going to make enough of these metals, right? So all of the projections that we've seen has seen this sector growing. In some cases, like for lithium, for instance, in 10 years we're going to need, depending on the demand scenarios, 500% or more of current production estimates, right? So where do you get this? Like, this is, as a geologist and a geochemist, that's kind of what I look into. It's like, well, where are we going to get these materials, these minerals, these elements that we're going to power the energy future? And I also, live in the Appalachian region. I live in Pittsburgh, so I worked for extractive industries. Fossil energy is not going anywhere. And in the region, we have a lot of legacy fossil energy waste. And so part of my research now is to see if we can valorize that waste. So what can we extract from it? How much is there, and how does these minerals that we're pulling out of this waste, how do they contribute to the energy narrative during the clean energy transition? And more recently, I was looking at produced water. Produced water is like a burgeoning issue across the nation. Permian Basin, we're making almost 3 billion liters of this stuff a day. It is a waste. It's full of tons of stuff that you really don't want at the surface. It could be an environmental issue if it's spilled, right? So you have to contain it and you do proper procedures and handling and stuff. But it also has a lot of things that could be beneficial. It has water. If you get all of the divalent cations and radiologicals and blah 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 blah, cyclo, polycyclical aromatic hydrocarbons, and you could feasibly water a cornfield with it. And fortunately, in Pennsylvania, it has a lot of lithium. So we always kind of knew that this stuff was in there, but again, it comes down to the numbers. We didn't really have the data to make a firm estimate on the quantity of lithium or other critical mineral in these feedstocks. And so what I did was I mined residual waste profiles. So these are just compliance reports. We mined about 2,000 of them to get the data so that we could make some estimates. And we discovered that Pennsylvania alone, just produced water from the Marcellus Shale, so otherwise referred to as like fracking wastewater or things like that, can have somewhere between 30 and 40% of like the current domestic lithium import reliance could just be met from lithium from this waste. And so, that's kind of what I do. We're extrapolating this type of analysis to other legacy fossil energy wastes, both nationally, to come up with basically a national prospectus for policymakers to use in making informed decisions.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Justin. Shawn, if you're there, be up next.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Shawn Bennett here. I am the division manager of the Energy and Infrastructure, our Energy Resilience Division here at Battelle. So, really our primary focus is really a lot of projects focused on decarbonization, and that goes through carbon sequestration, which is a very important component of a lot of energy transition. Plans moving forward, and also work in hydrogen. We are the prime of the Appalachian Regional Clean Hydrogen Hub, and we also were working with Brother Cypress, which is Louisiana-based direct air capture hub. So, from Battelle's perspective, and especially from hydrogen's perspective in CCS, there is a realization that you can't electrify everything, right? And so, in that recognition, you have to figure out how to decarbonize items that are hard to abate. And that is mostly the industrial sector, as well as the power gen sector, and trying to find unique cases for that. So, for our work at Battelle, we've been primarily focused here over the past several decades on a lot of the geological characterization in the Appalachian Basin through our Midwest Regional Carbon Initiative. Really about 18 states from as far west of the Mississippi River all the way over to the East Coast, and really kind of delineating and seeing the opportunities for carbon sequestration. And then with hydrogen, also looking at those opportunities there. So, it is an interesting place to be. I would say historically we had not seen a lot of that excitement happening over the past several years. I would say with the increase of the 45Q tax credit, you really started to see more companies outside of ethanol taking a closer look at decarbonization plans. And once it reached that $85 mark, while probably could be higher, I would say you saw more industries outside of ethanol really taking a closer look at that. And with that, it's significantly reducing a lot of the carbon emissions within the United States. The plans are for that. I would say the plans are important because we are still waiting for the EPA to really act upon a lot of the permits that have been submitted here over the past several years. Right now, I would say the permit backlog at EPA is looking anywhere from 3 to 5 years. You are starting to see a lot of states recognize that maybe it's best handled by the states, and they're asking for primacy. You're seeing that in West Virginia, who has already requested primacy from the EPA, as well as created their own regulatory framework to allow that to take place within the state. Pennsylvania has also just signed that legislation as well of the regulatory framework, and hopefully they will be requesting primacy soon. I don't know if they have or not yet. And then Ohio is moving in the background. We just saw that take place down in Louisiana. And again, it is that recognition that, the states know their geology better. They understand it. They know how to best move forward and how to regulate it. And they also have the ability to staff up a lot of those organizations so they can make sure that it's safe and then actually deploy. So, I would say as far as carbon sequestration is moving forward, it's a very exciting time. It is really, kind of moving from 2016 until now. A lot of the market sentiment, whether it's through the shareholders, whether it's through the public, that, there is a request by the people to reduce our carbon emissions, and as well as shareholders to reduce carbon emissions. And I would say we're in a very interesting time of having a lot of companies looking at this and really capitalizing on this moving forward.
Okay. Sid, over to you. Sid, you're on mute. You're still on mute.
I'm now back on.
Okay.
I don't know why. Thank you very much. I'm really sorry that I couldn't be there and join in person. Nuclear energy today is nuclear fission heat that produces steam or steam turbine electricity generation. Globally, there are about 430 nuclear non-military fission reactors in operation globally, with 94 in the U.S. Now, regarding fusion instead of fission nuclear, contrary to the hype we sometimes see, practical nuclear fusion energy is not on the horizon, in my opinion, and many would say it has yet to show that it can produce electricity practically. My comments today are really about fission nuclear. For the record, and to put us all on the same page, I just note that electricity is today only about 20% of global total energy consumption. It's about 40% of U.S. total energy consumption. Again, only 20% of global energy is electricity. 40% of U.S. total energy consumption is electricity. Nuclear energy provides some of this electricity, about 10% of the total global electricity, about 20% of the U.S. electricity. Although nuclear energy is an essential amount of the required electricity, nuclear energy overall only produces about 2% of total global energy consumption. Again, nuclear energy is about 2% of total global energy, but 10% of total global electricity, and 20% of U.S. electricity. Nuclear energy is considered a primary energy source, along with fossil fuels, wood and related burnable products, solar and wind electricity, hydroelectric and geothermal energy. Nuclear electricity load factor is over 90%, meaning that it can operate nearly continuously at its rated capacity. For example, a 2 gigawatt generating capacity nuclear plant can produce 2 gigawatts of electricity nearly all the time. One more fact I want to note is that nuclear energy is considered a clean energy. However, it is not CO2 emissions free considering the complete cycle, but it is low emissions as an energy source. This is important. Hydrogen, biofuels, lower emission diesel and jet airplane fuel all must be made from a primary energy source like nuclear energy. And since the efficiency for making these non-primary energies is not 100%, there's more energy required to make the non-primary energy than it contains. Thus, the more non-primary energies that are produced like hydrogen, the more overall global energy is consumed, good or bad. The more hydrogen we produce, the more energy the world's going to consume. With this background, let me note the new things regarding nuclear energy. First, nuclear energy is receiving much attention at present. That's new. A decade ago, nuclear seemed to be on the decline with plants being closed, scheduled to be closed. Public perceptions, negative perceptions, were much swayed by the Fukushima and Chernobyl incidents, by an abundant low-cost natural gas that from fracking unconventional resources suggesting we didn't need nuclear electricity, and the U.S. electricity consumption growth was small, maybe only 0.5% per year growth, which seemed easy to meet without a nuclear scale-up. This has all changed. Today, fail-safe walk-away reactors seem plausible, thereby reducing the fear of a radiation incident. The energy transition is trying to reduce CO2 emissions, with some wanting to reduce or even eliminate natural gas electricity. And electricity consumption growth in the U.S. may be more like 1.5% per year today instead of the previous 0.5% per year. There seems to be strong bipartisan congressional support at the federal level, and some even suggest that nuclear may be the silver bullet to reduce fossil fuel consumption. Planned U.S. reactor closings are being changed to planned relicensing to stay open. Federal government spending is huge to help continue operations at some reactors and to secure adequate fuel for the U.S. reactors. Second on the what's new list, a new group of reactors, small-scale modular reactors, or SMRs, is being pursued. SMRs are suggested as lower cost, less time to build, by constructing in the factory, not on site, with modular and interchangeable reactor components. Their size may be 200 to 300 megawatts or smaller, and a variety of SMR, these small modular reactor designs, are being considered by both government and private companies, with suggestions of higher efficiencies and highly safe operation. In the most optimistic view, some suggest small-scale units may be shipping container size, nuclear batteries in effect, that could be quickly relocated, more easily moved to needed power sites. The third thing has to do with providing the nuclear fuel required for nuclear energy. The U.S. is aggressively ramping up uranium enrichment fuel production capabilities. Additionally, the high-assay, low-enriched uranium, the HALEU fuels that may be needed by some of these small modular reactors designs is being developed. So availability and cost of fuel is something that's a forgotten component for nuclear energy often, even though a long-term fuel supply is an essential requirement. Fourth on the list of new things is that nothing is happening regarding spent fuel deposition. We produce about 2,000 metric tons of new spent fuel each year in the U.S. from our 94 reactors. One might think that new considerations for managing the spent fuel, including reprocessing both current stored spent fuel and new generation spent fuel, might be high on the list of things, but they don't seem to be. Spent fuel disposition continues a significant issue. Finally, regarding new things is the rapid expansion of nuclear energy in China, particularly the development of SMRs. China may have over 20 SMRs under development, along with large-scale reactors. China is clearly becoming a leader in reactor development and fuel enriching, adding to US, Russia, Europe, UK, Canada, and India as nuclear energy leaders. In conclusion, there is new interest in expanded nuclear energy with real reason for that expansion. However, there are substantial headwinds to these new nuclear energy opportunities. Although public perceptions and government support have much moved toward nuclear energy expansion, the system of developing, licensing, constructing, providing the fuel, and managing the spent fuel is incredibly complex. And there is certainly not unanimous agreement how to do all of these. Also, no standard SMR design has emerged that could allow many US SMRs to immediately go forward. Instead, there seems more a competition of which nuclear reactor might become the US standard. Further headwinds include uncertainties regarding uranium enrichment to provide the required fuel, including the higher enriched fuels that some SMRs may require. This takes time, and this too is complex. Furthermore, how nuclear fuel sales will work and the cost for the fuel seems unclear. And naturally, the fuel will affect the overall long-term nuclear electricity costs. Certainly, utilities or power companies that will generate the electricity and sell the electricity need to know what their generation cost will be in order to guarantee a long-term electricity price to the end user. These headwind uncertainties lead to best estimates that U.S. nuclear electricity will struggle to continue to provide 20% of U.S. electricity in the next decade, and any U.S. expansion, whether via a number of SMRs or larger gigawatt-scale reactors, would not occur until well into the 2030s at best. Nevertheless, nuclear electricity is critical, very critical, I believe, for the U.S. as it faces large electricity demand growth. Nuclear offers stable, anytime, low emissions energy, but nuclear is not a silver bullet for the energy transition. One last note I would like to make is regarding nuclear for direct heat, high temperature applications. If nuclear could provide direct heat for cement production, hydrogen production, via thermal dissociation of water, or for steel, aluminum, or copper production, nuclear energy could play a much larger role than just for electricity production. These are not new ideas, and to me are most interesting. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Sid, and thank you to the other speakers for their introductions. We have plenty of time for questions from the audience, so think about what you want to ask. I'm going to take the honor as the moderator to ask the first question, which is to all the speakers. You kind of outlined what you're working on and things. And earlier today, in a number of the presentations, there were graphs put up showing pathways to net zero, to lower emissions, and things like that. And I guess my question to each of the speakers, from your perspective, Justin, from you talked about lithium, which is a key component for batteries when people look at it, but other critical minerals. Minerals are also key to renewables. Shawn talked about CCS, which a lot of people talk about as essential to get the emissions from fossil fuel plants down, and Sid talked about nuclear. And so I would like all of the speakers to address from their perspective how critical, or can we reach a net zero without your technologies? So we
Can I make a beginning comment on that, Michael?
Sure.
One thing I notice as we often look at CO2 emissions globally, or even in the US, it seems that we often don't consider the complete cycle for the energy source. And it seems people may reduce carbon dioxide proportionate to, for example, an oil or coal reduction, but they don't add in the carbon dioxide emissions that result from the other energy source. There is no energy source that is emissions free. Solar and wind, I'm an advocate, but they have plenty of emissions. And unless we include the complete cycle, we don't know whether or not the given energy alternative may or may not be reducing carbon dioxide.
Jesse, you want to go next?
Yeah, that's a very good point. You had, from the minerals side, the materials side, we are going to need more neodymium, we're going to need more lithium, we're going to need more praseodymium, gallium, all of these. There's 51 of these minerals, and we're going to. But on top of that too, we're going to need iron and copper. We need to extract materials and manufacture the infrastructure, and to such a degree, I think it's comparable to the New Deal or something. For this to actually work and to hit a net zero energy economy, we have to come up with this stuff, and we have to build it. And lithium might not be the element, the hot element, battery element in 50 years, right? There are sodium ion batteries, things like that. But right now, it is like the cash cow. It's the most energy dense. It's the lightest.
Particularly if you want to move fast.
And if you want to move fast,
You
and
gotta
there's
use what you have.
Yeah, I was at a talk by Julio Friedman. He's a big CCUS guy, and he sort of broke it into you either have time to innovate. We don't have time to innovate. We need to deploy some of this technology that we have now at scale, and so for that, lithium is definitely the key. And also there's a major component of we need to find these materials. And so what I'm working on is stuff that's already at the surface, this secondary and unconventional ores. So this is coal combustion residuals, produced water, things like that. And one thing that I haven't really heard in any of the discussions here is geothermal, which I know it's not, there's a lot of R&D going into it. And with most of the stuff that I'm referring to, we're still at a technology readiness level of 2 or 3. This is all super new, which is exciting as a researcher because it's low-hanging fruit. You can have very impactful research with fewer contributions. But I guess I'll yield to Shawn if you wanted to comment.
Shawn?
No, I mean that's a great question. When you think about what does net zero look like, and Sid, I agree, right? You have to go all the way back to the mine, especially when you think about renewables, right? So, how do you fit in the full life cycle there for an analysis? Just as with oil and gas, we go back to the wellhead with a lot of these life cycles, I think it has to be universal. But having said that, when you think about net zero goal, there is that realization that I said earlier, you can't electrify everything. And, carbon sequestration is going to be necessary if we want to continue to power the United States. Renewables cannot solve that problem on their own. They are not very good at baseload generation, and again, the intermittent capability. We are an industrial nation, and that's something we should be proud of. And that's in the United States, we make things. That's what's really kind of made the Appalachian region great over many decades. But then you also see what's happening with data centers, right? We're not going to be using less power anytime soon. In fact, we're going to be using more power in very short term, looking at AI and looking at a lot of the technology that we're doing moving forward. So, the recognition of to get to net zero, you need to keep these natural gas-fired generating plants online. You're going to need carbon sequestration with that. If you want to keep coal-fired power plants online, you're going to need to have carbon sequestration with that. If we take too many of those offline and we rely too heavily on renewables, our grid will not be stable, and that is going to create a situation that I don't think any of us want to live through. Brownouts and blackouts will result in deaths, and nobody wants to see that happen. So how do we get to a scenario where we are comfortable with making sure that we keep power gen online and the grid stable? And that is where CCS plays a very important role for net zero. Now, having said that, for the power gen sector, and again, nuclear is also very important in that too. I don't want to credit any power source. It's all power sources are going to be needed, and really leveraging on those power sources that are local to where you are living, and that's important. Things for natural gas in Appalachia. That's important with hydropower in the Pacific Northwest. It's important to areas with nuclear, and with areas of California, Nevada, and Arizona. That wind and solar plays a very important role. But having said that, then you also have the industrial sector, right? If you are able to use carbon sequestration for power gen, you have renewables for power gen, nuclear for power gen, you still have about 10% of the industrial sector that can't be decarbonized, just from the natural sector there. And that is where I think hydrogen comes into play, a very important role there. And with hydrogen, that is a net zero. If you go blue, pink, or green hydrogen, that is where you see that decarbonization. That's an industrial processes like steel making, like glass making, like aluminum smelting, really those other industrial processes that are very important. And carbon sequestration in areas like Appalachia is going to be very important for blue hydrogen. Blue hydrogen is right now the most cost competitive hydrogen out there. So that is going to allow that to really help a lot of those areas decarbonize. So I think, from that, a pivotal role is carbon sequestration in reaching a lot of those net zero strategy, but it truly is an all the above scenario to make sure that happens. And then it goes for, everything that's happening in wind and solar. And then as Sid was talking about, how do we invest more in nuclear energy and carbon sequestration to really kind of see how we can reach that goal of that net zero emissions.
Great.
Michael, can I ask Shawn a question here on that? Are we sure that carbon capture and sequestration and monitoring, are we sure that it does lower carbon dioxide emissions? Particularly air capture. Carbon dioxide is about 400 parts per million, 415 or something parts per million in the atmosphere globally. And when we want to capture 1 million tons of that, we show up to process a lot of air. Are we sure that we don't create more carbon dioxide than we actually capture?
Yes, because if you're using renewable energy to operate the direct air capture facilities, atmospheric CO2, right, is just historic legacy CO2 that's in the atmosphere. So you're capturing that. That is not going to solve the problem of what we need to do with capturing the CO2 from point source emissions. So you're going to require both. Even if we do capture all the CO2 emissions that are coming off the facilities, whether it's industrial or power gen, there is still a significant amount of excess CO2 that is in our atmosphere, and that is where direct air capture plays a very important role to reducing that. Now, if you are using natural gas to power the direct air capture facility, you may lose some, but you're still getting a net benefit of CO2 captured and sequestered.
Great. All right. Any questions from the audience?
Thank you, Michael. I have a question for Shawn. Is CCS economically feasible without a really, really hefty carbon tax, either directly or indirectly?
That's a great question, right? It's the carrot or the stick. That is what my former boss, Assistant Secretary Steve Winberg, used to always love to say, right? You either have a carbon tax or you have a tax credit, because there isn't currently a market for capturing CO2. So when the 45Q tax credit was $35 a ton, really the only way to make that profitable was through the ethanol process because it's very heavy in CO2 and a very clean stream. As it started to increase, you start to see more interest in capturing the CO2. And that's getting at 85. I would say, the MPC study that we did during the previous administration, the Department of Energy through the National Petroleum Council, really saw about $100, $110 a ton of being an actionable number to actually make that work. I would say, I've seen a lot of numbers floated out there that are really low. You have to look at the full life cycle of not just the capture, but the compression and the storage. And sometimes people count one and not the other and not all three. And you start to get really interesting numbers that aren't going to pencil out. But I think about that 100, 110 gets you the price of capture, the price of compression, transportation, and sequestration, and maybe a little bit higher depending on the process itself. Now, having said that, the tax credit is there, and that's currently in operation. That is going to be on Congress if they want to look at what a carbon tax looks like, right? Carbon tax is something that has been floated around for decades. We have not seen any action on that really since maybe kind of the cap and trade conversation here back in 2008. But they would have to take action on that and take it off instead of using the carrot with the tax credit, then giving them the stick with the carbon tax. You're seeing that more in Europe, right, with the cross-border adjustment tax and other items. So look further along in making a carbon tax there, but we're just not seeing that here in the United States.
Philip?
Yes, I have a question for Sid and a question for Justin. Sid, I'd like to hear your comments and your views on enhanced geothermal technologies for electric power generation. And Justin, your research sounds really interesting. I'd first like to know if you've published that research, and as part of your research, have you evaluated the feasibility or the technologies necessary and systems necessary to capture lithium from water on a commercial basis and commercialize that? Have you taken a look? I'm sure it's at a preliminary basis, but what technologies and systems are out there, or what needs to be developed in order to make a concept like yours commercial? Sid, thank you.
I can comment on the enhanced geothermal. I'm an advocate of geothermal. We have the largest geothermal research program in the world, I guess, here at the University of Utah. But when you convert heat to electricity, that's very low efficiency no matter how you do it. Globally, in 2023, the average was about 33% efficiency going from BTUs of heat to watt hours of electricity. And the highest efficiency is natural gas turbines. And they're about 40, and if you have a binary cycle, some argue you can get nearly 50% efficiency with natural gas turbines. The natural gas has one other really big effect for us here in the West, and that's water. And in the West, we have really water scarcity, and so if we use water for electricity production, for cooling and steam generation, we will have to cut down on agriculture land because that's the trade-off here. Now, if I go back to the energy efficiency, if we go to the geothermal, where you have lower temperatures, maybe 550 Fahrenheit or less, 450 to 600 Fahrenheit, the efficiency there drops down to more like 10% converting heat to electricity, so that's bad. And so hopefully it's going to work. There are two programs, the research program and a project in Nevada now that's circulating water into hot rock and bring it out. But it really looks tough for electricity, but for direct heat applications, heating a military reservation or a university campus or a part of a city with direct heat, it would seem much higher. Right now, about 0.5% of all U.S. electricity is from geothermal, hydrothermal systems.
Justin?
Thank you, Sid. Regarding your question on the lithium study that I had, so we did publish that, Nature Scientific Reports, back in April. If you just Google lithium Marcellus, it's been everywhere. I've received way too much popularity from this. a bit of an introvert and I've given several interviews at this point, so and I'm up on stage in front of all you people. So regarding the state of the science and how you extract it, that kind of comes into another component that I didn't really highlight. So you have to know how much, you have to know where it's at, right? That's fundamentally a spatial question. You have to know how it differs both three-dimensionally and laterally as in a reserve. But you also need to know where the element is, its binding environment and things like that. So a rock is composed of many different many different minerals, right? Lithium is probably, associated with one of those. So then if you answer those questions using, you can dissolve the rock, you can slice it into really thin sections and look at it under a microscope. There are a number of analytical methods you can do. Then you can start to model its extraction processes. And so we're really, in a lot of these secondary and unconventional resources, like coal, fly ash, and things like that, and produced water, we're kind of in that characterization phase. There are a number of companies that will tell you that their direct lithium extraction technology is the one. It's going to work if you give them lots of money, or you buy their product and install it in your flow sheet. But each one of these waste streams is compositionally unique, and so you really almost have to tailor the extraction process to that binding environment or that localized characterization. That being said, there is promising efforts. Both, I think the Department of Energy, they funded a number of research into sorbents and things like that, and ideally we could use a functionalized material from one of these legacy fossil energy wastes to then extract the materials that we need for the future. The lab I work at, we're working on building zeolites out of coal, and the zeolites, it's basically like a protein shake, but you filter out all of the protein, and there's lithium stuck to the stuff that settles at the bottom, and then you have a clean supernatant or clean water that you can then use for a coal flue gas desulfurization or some other industrial application. So hopefully that wasn't too convoluted and answered your questions. Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience?
Yeah, question for Mr. Bennett. I read an article a year or two ago about direct air capture of carbon dioxide, and the article I read stated that the largest direct air capture carbon dioxide facility in the world is in Iceland, and its annual capture of carbon dioxide is equivalent to about 1/2 of global emissions, and that doesn't include natural sources of carbon dioxide. So I guess my question is this really a feasible technology that we should be investing billions of dollars into for a relatively insignificant amount of gain?
Yeah, and so, great question, and it is a philosophical question, right? What should we be investing in, and at what levels should we be investing? As the United States government or even as Congress. So, when you think about carbon capture and carbon sequestration, direct air capture is obviously the least efficient way of capturing carbon. Obviously, you want to go to the point source, but there is a lot of industries that cannot capture their own CO2 emissions, and they need those offsets to capture the CO2, and that's really where the direct air capture comes into capturing the CO2. Now, it is also a relatively new industry, so it is just getting started up on a larger scale. The one you're talking about, I think, was probably capturing about 5,000 tons per year, right, per annum. Now getting up to about 25,000 tons. That's really the largest direct air capture facility in the world, maybe 35,000 tons total. What we're doing here in the United States is taking that to 1 million for a single facility. And that increase is significant. So, you're taking a nascent industry that is proving that it can work and capture and provenly capture that atmospheric CO2 at a cost. And then really that bipartisan infrastructure, a lot of money in the program through DOE is really allowing this to get into that maturation level and de-risk the industry as a whole. So you can see that more investment in more of these projects moving forward. So, you know, when I think about the intent of the Department of Energy and what they have historically looked at, it has always been low TRL, newer energy technologies that cannot be proven by the market, need that government assistance to really kind of reach that next level. And this really kind of fits squarely within that because you have something that is small scale in nature. It works where it works. Currently, you know, very little, 35,000 tons per year does not seem much. What the DOE is able to put money behind is to create a facility that's going to keep, for each facility, capture 1 million tons per year. That's really going to be the size of, maybe 3 football fields, right? Total as a footprint. If you're able to have that to be successful, you can start making the economics work, not just for the direct air capture tax credit, but also for the commercial market that is out there right now. The Microsofts, the Googles, the Deltas, Uniteds of the world are looking to buy those tax credits, so that is a different premium. That is just creating a market case for direct air capture. And if they can make those direct air capture technologies profitable and it's creating jobs, I think we're doing something good, not just saving the, reducing carbon emissions, but we're also creating jobs, new economic opportunity in areas where it can work. So, I think where we're at right now is it is not going to solve the world's problems, but it is something that is going to help reduce the CO2 emissions and help others meet the net zero goals. So I would not see it as a waste of money. I would say this is where DOE's money has historically worked best, is making sure that they're proving out new and nascent technologies and allowing that to be commercialized where the government doesn't have to step in and work on these projects anymore.
Great, so that's going to have to be the last word for our panel, so please join me in thanking our panelists. Turn it over to Andrew.
Fantastic. Okay. And Sid, we want you back next year. I think he's offline, sorry. Okay.
I want to come back.
Okay, we'd love to have you back in person. So we are running, we just have a few minutes here, so because of the time shift, we did not have a chance to show the video. Ambassador Ibrahim from the Embassy of Azerbaijan has been with us the last couple of years. They were unable to attend. Why? Because they are so busy preparing for COP29, I'm not sure they even know what time it is. I mean, it's really busy there. Obviously, they have delegations going back and forth. It's very understandable. But they did arrange for the CEO of COP29, Elnor Sultanov, who is also Deputy Minister of Energy for Azerbaijan, to provide us with a video. So we're going to have this video right before we go into lunch. Mr. Sultanov, who I had a chance to meet in Baku, is a very nice gentleman, has served as Dean of the School of Public and International Affairs and Director of the Caspian Energy and Environment Center in Azerbaijan. Mr. Sultanov holds a PhD in political science from Texas Tech University, where he also taught, and holds a bachelor and master's degree in international relations from Middle East Technical University in Turkey. In his role as CEO of COP29, Mr. Sultanov will coordinate the presidency's activities and the delivery of its agenda. Mr. Sultanov will also represent the presidency at multi-level forums to advance climate action. Mark, if we can have the video, please, and then after that, we'll go right into lunch.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. It's my honor to address the participants of the Drake Energy and Climate Security Conference. We managed to build the most sophisticated civilization ever in the history of humankind in the last 2 centuries. This was possible only with the Industrial Revolution, and the latter was possible only with the Energy Revolution, which started with coal, and then oil and natural gas were added to the short list of our current primary energy sources. Not everyone benefited from these economic and social developments equally. But it is fair to say that, on average, we all are living in a better world today. But it has already become sufficiently clear that this civilization's development model is destroying its very achievement, and with it, the planet Earth itself, at least the way we know it. The greenhouse gas emissions we generate is causing global warming, which is changing the climate with all of its concomitant negative consequences. As the President of the Republic of Azerbaijan stated at Pittsburgh Climate Dialogue, however, we shouldn't be choosing between economic development and climate solutions. We should find ways of tackling climate crisis that result in more and sustainable development. Let's set it straight. Energy is not the only source of greenhouse gas emissions. Agriculture, industry, and waste sectors account for a sizable volume of these gases. But energy is responsible for around 2/3 of these emissions. Moreover, although oil and gas are synonymous with fossil fuel burn, in terms of combustion, coal is producing more carbon dioxide than either. I should also express my view that whether somebody produces or consumes hydrocarbons, or both, does not make much difference. Every single one of us is a party to this global economic architecture running on organic material formed millions of years ago. Therefore, I personally do not feel that oil and gas producers must stand out in terms of responsibility due to energy greenhouse gas association. I think that all of us, whether states, corporations, civil society entities, or individuals, are responsible for mobilizing whatever resources we have. This is the yardstick to measure what is right and what is morally defensible as we face this existential climate crisis. We, Azerbaijanis, are proud that we have been at the forefront of first energy revolution of the 19th century, although our society has not benefited as much as it deserved before independence. And we have every intention to be at the forefront of the current green energy revolution. And there is no contradiction in this. My country is a good example of how assets and values generated by the traditional energy resources could be mobilized and repurposed for green transition. The experience, connections, political capital, trust, and infrastructure that Azerbaijan has used with regard to oil and gas are now coming in handy in speeding up green transition. My country, which has been so great in terms of building traditional energy corridors, exporting wealth and security along the way, is now focused on building green energy corridors, among other things. This year we have additional responsibilities as COP29 presidents. As the outcomes of global stocktake show, the reality is grim, and current climate action is falling short of living up to the challenge. We need to decrease greenhouse gases by 43% by 2030, 65% by 2035 compared to 2019, and reach net zero by 2050 to keep 1.5 degrees Celsius mission in sight. This will be a challenge, but there is no option B. We need new climate plans, NDCs and NEPs that are course-corrected and keep us focused on the North Star of 1.5. But which would be impossible to achieve, especially for developing countries, which has contributed the least in terms of greenhouse gases, but are bearing the brunt of climate change also. We need means of implementation, first and foremost, new climate finance deal that is adequate to the urgency and scale of the problem and takes into consideration the needs and priorities of developing countries. But non-party stakeholders, corporations, NGOs, and individuals should be active participants and contributors independent of political action if needed. The motto of COP29 presidency is "In solidarity for a green world." And it sums up all of the above quite well. Solidarity means collective action, since free riding and unilateralism is not a solution. Solidarity means just transition, since the needs of the most vulnerable should be heard and acted upon. Solidarity means a win-win game, because if the powerful feel that they will lose, they will try to slow down the process. And solidarity also means, and I like this part a lot, that we need everyone's sincere and over-the-top contribution, every bit and piece of it. Otherwise, we will fail. And that is not an option. Thank you.
So, my job is to keep the trains running on time. We're only 1 minute late. So let's go into lunch. Please, we have tables outside. There's a lovely lunch for you. Also, we're going to have a brief introduction from API out there, but gather some food. There's going to be some things for sale and so on. But anyways, I'll explain that later. So go on out and enjoy yourselves and share ideas and get to know each other.